This week on Quality Digest Live, we examine the importance of cybersecurity for your business.
Plus, the 3-day rule of management. That and more when we come back.
Today's episode of Quality Digest Live is sponsored by Olympus Vanta XRF Analyzers. Fast material identification for safer products.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for September 29th, 2017. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest.
That he is, and I'm Quality Digest publisher Mike Richmond. Okay, we're going to start the show this week with the latest report from the American Customer Satisfaction Index, better known as the ACSI. The ACSI reports regularly on the various major sectors that make up the consumer economy here in the United States. The brands that have products or services within those sectors are ranked based on customer satisfaction using a 0 to 100 scale. So 100 is great. You don't see a lot of 90s even in the ACSI scale. The A is usually pretty good, and then just down to the 70s and the 60s usually for most products on the ACSI surveys. This time up, the ACSI reported on one of the most closely watched and competitive sectors in the economy, automobiles and automakers. The top line figure shows that overall satisfaction is down just a tick from a score of 82 overall, again for the entire industry in 2016 to 81 this year. And as usual, European and Asian nameplates tend to do a little bit better than their US counterparts. Automakers based in Europe and Asia each averaged a score of 82, and brands in the United States averaged an 80. And again, these are actually pretty good numbers. I mean, you know, as we go through these a little bit, you're going to see that the scale is very tight. It's from the 70s to the 80s, and many times in the axis you see like from the mid 80s to the 60s on some of these things. So, people are pretty happy with their cars is the takeaway here. Well, and you take a look at the individual brands, it's clear that luxury makes and models tend to score a little bit better than their down market peers. Lexus, Mercedes-Benz, and Cadillac, for example, are three of the top brands in the survey, with scores of 86, 84, and 83 respectively. However, non-luxury brands like Toyota and Subaru with scores of 86 and 85 also performed really well. And those are kind of like actually semi-luxury brands, really, if you think about them, Subaru and Toyota. At the bottom of the list, again, and not that far down really, are Fiat and Dodge, both scored 75s. But again, those aren't really terrible if you look at the overall ACSI scores. In some sectors, scores like that might be near the top of the list. So the key takeaway here is that by and large, consumers are generally pretty satisfied when they purchase a new car. As you'd imagine they would. You got a new car, I mean...
I'm going to feel like I'm satisfied. I just laid out
20, 25, whatever, yeah. Now, this particular survey was based on interviews with 3,934 customers, chosen at random, and contacted via email between July 1st, 2016 and June 20th, 2017. So for more information, you can check out the ACSI online at www.theaxi.com. That's THEACSI.org. I said .com, it's a .org.
.org.
Yeah, .org. Yeah, really, ACSI does great stuff, and it's always really interesting to see how those brands
now sometimes when these things juggle around by a point or two, that's noise, right?
It's noise.
To me, what's interesting is if, and ACSI always puts these up, is the long-term trend. And you see that in general, foreign brands, foreign nameplates do tend to do better than American nameplates. Luxury do tend, even over time, now they may bobble up and down, but usually there is this divide between foreign and domestic.
You know what's interesting, and I know we got to run to this next story, but what's interesting about that is that you look at what ACSI judges on, and value is not one of the things that they judge on.
Right.
So obviously, the luxury brands are going to be much better because you're not considering the fact that you paid 3 times as much for a Lexus as you did maybe for a Honda.
Basically, they're saying, do you like it?
Do you like it?
Do you like it? Yeah.
So is value included in there? I mean, if you can afford
my guess is that intrinsically is built in.
But that accounts for a lot of it. If that value was one of the things that they judged on, maybe it wouldn't be quite as big of a separation. So,
I don't know. I'm not sure if they've ever. But it'd be interesting to compare the ACSI scores to the scores that are done by, like Consumer Reports and who else does a big.
The Consumer Reports is the big one, but
I think also somebody else does a big car comparison. I don't want to say Car and Driver
does, but it's not anyway. No, there's a few people that do that, but the ACSI one is pretty accurate, I think.
All right. Well, cybersecurity. Let's talk about that a little bit. Cybersecurity is something that used to be really only discussed by IT people. I mean, the rest of us knew about it, but didn't think about it all that much, or take it seriously, maybe is what I should say, until over the past, what, 5, 6, 7 years or so, there have been major cyber attacks on large company. The latest, of course, being the hack of Experian. And while a large attack like that, or the one on Sony or Target, to add a couple more, have been newsmakers, corporations are being cyber attacked to a lesser or greater extent all the time. So we all have to take cyber security seriously, but what does that really mean? I mean, maybe especially if you don't have your own IT department. So everybody says, oh, you got to take cybersecurity seriously. You're our little 9-person company here. So yeah, okay, so what does that mean?
You just install a new firewall for us.
Yeah. I have no idea what it does, but it's a nice little box with lots of
lights,
lots of lights and stuff on it. I don't know. Must do something. All right. Well, here to discuss cybersecurity a bit more knowledgeably with us today is Martin Volk. Martin Volk is the senior security analyst for Tufsude America. Thanks, Martin. Thanks for joining us.
Hello. Good morning. Thanks for having me on the show, Dirk and Mike.
Hey, no problem. Okay, so first of all, how big a problem is corporate cybersecurity today? I mean, do you have some sort of data that might quantify for us a little bit?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, as you said in the intro, it's becoming a more and more massive issue over the years. We like to refer to the Symantec Threat Report, which is a threat report around cybersecurity, which is published once a year by Symantec. And there are some interesting figures in there, like when we, for example, talk about ransomware. So in 2015, we had like 350,000 detected ransomware outbreaks. And in 2016, that figure went up to almost 500,000. Oh, wow. So you can see the increase in there.
So what's going on? I mean, are companies just ignorant of the problem? I mean, ignorant of cybersecurity? Are they too lazy to do anything about it, or don't have the skills to address the problem?
It's a bit of everything, really. I mean, there's certainly a lot more awareness these days than we had 10 years ago. But the mindset of a lot of companies and a lot of businesses these days is still around, why should I be hacked? Like, why me? Like, we are so small, we are a small law firm, we are a small hospital. Why would anyone have any interest to attack us? And that's really a big problem, because in the heads of people, they still think, oh, well, only a Goldman Sachs or only a Citigroup or only a large corporation will be attacked. But that's so not true, because we have hackers out there and script kiddies and whatnot, and they're randomly targeting. And, often they're going for the lowest hanging fruit. And a lot of hackers don't do it necessarily for financial gain. It's just, like to prove a point or to impress their friends. And, there are tools out there which randomly scan for vulnerabilities, and then you may be hit, or the small car shop around the corner with a website may be hit. It's not necessarily always the big corporations. And then secondly, the technology has been moving so fast over the last decade. If you look at all the technologies we have in use, wireless, cloud services, IT is part and parcel of today's life. And the security aspect has been neglected to a very, very large extent. Like, 10 years ago, an IT administrator could look after security on the side of it. But these days, you really need a full-time security or many full-time security analysts or experts to protect you appropriately. And it's a tricky decision for small businesses, because at the end of the day, you may not have the budgets available to hire a full-time person, but this is where services companies really come in, and they can help small customers and large customers.
Now, Martin, you recommend implementing an information security management system. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what that is. Is that a software? Is that a service? What exactly is that?
Okay, so an informational management system is not necessarily just one box or one piece of software or hardware. Security should be seen as a cycle. So when we talk about information security management, it's typically analyzing the critical assets the customer has to protect. So in other words, if you are, like an online retailer, what are the most critical assets you want to protect? Well, it's credit card information from your customer for a start, right? So when we talk about informational security management, we talk more about services, like analyzing the network, doing a gap analysis, doing penetration testing to see where the current state of security is and where they need to get to in order to be more secure.
Now, is this, okay, so suppose you're a small company, a really small company, and like us, and part of what you do is you do sell stuff online. We have a branch that sells training software, for instance, and so we do take credit card information. So that might be valuable, but we're still a small company. So this protection that you're talking about, is this something that even a small company can even afford to do?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's possible. For example, when you're talking about credit card transactions, like you can always outsource your transaction processing to PCI certified merchants, such as Google Pay, PayPal, and the likes. So that pushes the responsibility for cardholder data over to the merchant rather than doing it yourself. The drawback here at this situation is that you will have to pay them a fee per transaction, right? So whereas if you do it in-house, you can keep all the money within your business. But there are solutions for small companies, certainly.
Okay, and it sounds like you're saying that one of the first steps is you need to do maybe some sort, you need to have some sort of technical person do a gap analysis, essentially, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's looking at the infrastructure, not only at the technical pieces. This is often overlooked. You guys mentioned firewall earlier in the intro. A firewall is an integral point to security, but it's not everything. Like if you look what's happening these days, a lot of attacks are started by social engineering. So the classic spear phishing emails or putting USB sticks out with malicious software on it and just waiting for people to plug them in. So there's the human aspect, there's the technical aspect, and there's also the policy and framework aspect. Like creating acceptable use policies for employees, for example, so that they know how to browse the web safely and what to do and what not to do.
Okay. It's mentioned. It's funny you mentioned social engineering. We just fell for one of those.
Hell yeah!
Hey, here's your invoice from somebody that we knew, but it was a spam email. They had they'd spoofed somebody else's email and sent us something that would have been legit if it had actually come from them, but it wasn't. It was actually a little virus.
The SigBlock was the same?
Yeah, it was a stupid little virus. It was no big deal, but it's funny how easily it is. If somebody has somebody else's name and you know them, you can get sucked right into that stuff.
Yep.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, if you're interested in learning more about this topic, we, Quality Digest and TÜV SÜD, are joining forces to present a webinar called Developing a Cybersecurity Strategy. The webinar happens next week on Tuesday, October 3rd at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, and Martin Vogt, who you see is very knowledgeable and who just spoke to us, he will be our presenter and I'll be the host. So keep an eye on your email inbox for an invitation and register for the event if you haven't already. It's free, of course, so keep your eye open on that. And actually, I believe there's also a link underneath the player page here that you can click. That'll take you out to the registration page. So Martin Vogt, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, see you next week.
We'll see you next week. Right. Thanks, Martin. Good
it's funny how easy it is. I mean, the stupidest thing.
I know.
And we've all fallen for it one way or another.
And they, these socially engineered campaigns like this get smarter and smarter because they know what works and what doesn't work. So
it's crazy.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right. So another part of technology, and what we're going to talk about this week is 3D printing, one of my favorite subjects.
Yep.
3D printing with concrete. So 3D printing with concrete has been around for a while now. In fact, we covered it, it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. When we talked about contour crafting. That was a term for 3D printing with concrete from Baruch Kushnevas. a professor of engineering and director of the Center for Rapid Automated Fabrication Technologies at the University of Southern California. Very interesting guy, very interesting what he's been doing. But he isn't the only one. A lot of 3D concrete printing has been DIY with inventors and entrepreneurs and the like designing their own concrete 3D printers from off-the-shelf parts and open source software. But the printer is one thing, the material is another. What is the right combination of materials that make up the goo that's going to be extruded? You know, what is the strength of the goo? What is the right combination that won't slump too much and yet dry quickly enough that you can build layer on layer? And these are all great questions. And questions that a young college student, Austin Thomas, was able to address during his summer undergraduate research fellowship program at NIST. What a lucky guy.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
I want to be Austin.
I was say, that's not
Not
bad.
surprisingly, NIST wants to quantify the best composition of this concrete material used for 3D printing, and that is the project that Thomas was working on. And by the way, for you who aren't familiar with this, let me just fill you in a little bit. All the methods I have seen on concrete printing work roughly the same way. You've got the printer is like a big crane or robot with an extruder on it, and it is printing the building's shell and maybe infilling some, but then rebar is added and then maybe the entire shell is filled with concrete. So you end up with something that should have the strength of a traditionally poured concrete wall, like you know, the tilt-ups that we see all over the place, except it's has a lot more versatility in terms of design. So think, if you've seen the little you know, plastic extruding 3D printers, this is like that, except like, you know, 100 times bigger, and it's concrete. Same idea. All right. So there are several issues with printing concrete that Austin had to tackle. First, it has to be liquid enough to extrude. You have to be able to put this goo down a pipe, come out the other end, and come out nicely. It has to be relatively fast curing, because after you've laid down one layer, you've got to be able to come back and lay down another layer without having to wait too long for that first layer to have dried, right? So it has to be fairly quickly drying. And even though it's going to have stuff like rebar that's going to fill in part of that. And the magic mix has to be repeatable and work reliably with a 3D printer. And so, by the way, like you said this before, I think it would have been amazing to be Austin and be invited to work on this project. I think he's like a third-year college student.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So Austin spent a lot of his 10 weeks at NIST experimenting with different formulations, all sorts of different formulations for the concrete, until he came up with this custard-like mix that seemed to work well. Then he added another, this was pretty interesting, he added another nozzle to the printer in addition to the concrete extruder, and this nozzle would print a mesh of carbon fiber to help reinforce the concrete layer. So you'd have like one nozzle would lay down a layer of concrete, you'd come back, you'd lay down a mesh of carbon fiber, another layer of concrete, another layer of carbon fiber, all of this to actually reinforce the concrete itself. He then printed some test blocks using that method, and stress testing them using a 3-point bend test. I think you all know what that is. You've got two supports right here. You put your brick across it. Then you got a support that comes down in the middle and kind of bends it and tries to break it, measures the force that it takes to break. And they actually performed really well. And this was all how he spent his summer vacation. It was all within 10 weeks.
Wow.
Now, I mean, the technology is cool. I really, dig the technology. 3D printing with concrete is pretty amazing stuff. But what, to me, really kind of interested me is, not the technology. I mean, forget about the Lego and Minecraft stuff. It's that as we approach manufacturing day, this is the stuff that needs to be brought up. All the crazy advancements that are going on in industries that most people think of as nothing but dirty fingernail work. I mean, when you think of construction, when you think of building concrete homes, you think construction, right? Dirty job. When you think of a lot of manufacturing jobs, dirty job, dirty fingernail jobs, and that's the way a lot of people view these things. But they're not. They've gotten so complex and so high tech. And people like Thomas, Austin Thomas, he's in the middle of it. And organizations like NIST and even private companies are giving people like Austin Thomas, this experience to work with technologies firsthand. And I think that's just I think that's the exciting bit about this is, you know, you have these young kids, they're in college or sometimes even before college, they're in high school, and they're getting this chance to go out and experience what these traditionally dirty industries are really doing right now, and it's really amazing. It's cool stuff.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Oh, really by the way, Baruch Koshnevis, who I mentioned at the beginning, his company, I think he has left. I'm not sure if he's still a professor anymore in Southern California. His company, Contour Crafting Corporation, plans to start delivery of its first printers early next year. So these are actually being produced and will be up for sale next year.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I know.
You know, I mean, the way that a lot of these are being used is to construct, I think, housing for people.
Right.
And people that, especially in disaster zones, we've seen some disasters where this would be really,
That's one
really
idea
valuable.
is a way to quickly build up homes.
Build up homes for people that have had their homes
Yeah.
destroyed by, like, say, hurricanes or earthquakes or whatever it may be. We've seen that.
They're also looking at them also for parts. So, you know, Koshnevis, his company, for instance, is looking at 3D printing entire homes. And it does more than just squirt concrete. He's got robots that lay in rebar, robots that lay in girders and that sort of stuff. But other companies are looking at 3D printing for printing traditional construction parts like concrete beams, right? So rather than do you know, creating concrete beams in the traditional way, is 3D print concrete beams, because they claim they can give you the same strength but using less concrete. And there's a lot of advantages, not only cost but environmental advantages. Concrete is really CO2 intensive. So interesting stuff.
Good stuff. Thank you, Dirk. All right, well, you know, we have several really great columnists. You know this, Dirk. We have several great columnists that contribute to Quality Digest on a regular basis, but our next guest is really one of our personal favorites. His topic is management, and he uses his training and experience in psychology to help managers achieve significantly improved outcomes for themselves, their organizations, and their employees too. Kelly Graves is the CEO of Internal Business Solutions, and he's the author of the book, The Management and Employee Development Review, which is available now from Productivity Press. His latest column, Business Counseling and the 3-Day Rule, appeared in the September 12th issue of the Quality Digest newsletter. So Kelly Graves, welcome back to Quality Digest Live.
Great to be here with you guys.
How are you?
All right.
And we should clarify, this is the 3-day rule, not the 5-second rule.
Right.
Dirk is an expert at the latter.
5 seconds, 5 minutes, whatever.
Whatever, you know, whatever. But you know, I think this column, it kind of deals with some tougher stuff than all your columns are kind of very forward in terms of what managers need to do. This one deals with some rather difficult stuff because it deals with kind of the natural human fear, the desire to avoid confrontation.
Right.
And from that stems, if you don't deal with confrontation well as a manager, you can't manage your employees properly. And some employees need to be, quite frankly, managed more than others. And if somebody does need help and needs you to help manage them a little bit more, you need to confront them, right? So how does a manager overcome that reluctance?
I don't know if they ever overcome it. I've been doing this for 2 decades, and still when I go in and work with a manager to sit with an employee, there's always a sense of foreboding. You know, you always get that. What you get, though, is the more you do it and practice it and have those difficult conversations, you get better at them, and you realize that the fear of fear is actually worse than the actual outcome. And especially with the 3-day rule, if you know what's going to happen ahead of time, then you know the steps to the game.
Well, talk about that. So the 3-day rule, this is an interesting one because you talk about this within the framework of a conversation on a Friday.
Okay. That
may happen where a employee might have one of these difficult conversations with a manager with the employee. So how does that 3-day rule roll out after that initial conversation?
You know, I ran into this about 15 years ago, and I noticed these patterns as I would have conversations with managers and employees. I kept noticing this pattern. And basically how the 3-day rule works is that when you sit down and have a serious conversation with an employee, this is after you've had 2 or 3, you know, build-ups, and you know, this is what you need to work on, what do I need to work on as a manager, and they're just not getting it. And so this is that last-ditch effort where you really have to sit down and have a serious conversation about, you know what, you really need to take hold of what we're trying to get here, or your job's in jeopardy. Okay, so this is the end of the line. And what I noticed is that people would get upset. And so the first one is they're going to get upset and they're going to quit within that 3 days. They're just going to be upset. They might quit at the moment, or on Monday morning or Tuesday, they're going to say, I'm done. The second one is they're going to get upset, and they're going to do a 180-degree turnaround. And that's what I wrote about in the article. Is the woman, we saved her. I mean, she was on her way out. The owner wanted to get rid of her, and I said, well, let's use this as practice. You know, I mean, you're going to terminate her anyway. Right. Let's try this out, and we saved a woman's job. She's still there. Yeah. You know, all these years later. The third one, and this is a little bit harder to decipher, is that the employee will get mad for 3 days. That's the common theme. Is their ego's hurt. Yeah. You know, they're going to get hurt. And they come back, they want their job, but then they go underground and they sabotage. And this is the one that you've really got to be careful for, because they're painting the face that I want to be part of the team, but they're actually sabotaging both themselves and the organization.
Are they aware that they're doing that?
Some are, some aren't. And the ones that aren't, they don't realize to the degree that they're doing it. But they do know that they have animosity and that they are attacking the company. I mean, it's pretty easy to know, am I helping or am I hurting? Yeah. You know, and so they know that they're hurting, but it's driven out of, you know, ego and all the other things that come into play there. And so what they do is they end up going underground, I call it, and really negatively impacting the grapevine, and you know, talking bad about the manager, talking bad about the company. And this is where the manager has to be very aware of what's going on and nip that in the bud. And if you have an employee, what I found is if you have an employee that you think might go in that direction, the best thing that you can do is tell them about the 3-day rule ahead of time when you're having that difficult conversation. Say, you know what I found is one of 3 things are going to happen in the next 3 or 4 days. You're going to do number 1, you're going to do number 2, or you're going to do number 3. If you end up doing number 3, I'm going to know about it, and then I'll have to terminate you. And that is your best bet in terms of deflating them, because it catches them before they even catch themselves, because they're just going to go through the mad, you know, they're just angry at that point. But on Monday or Tuesday, when they come back to work, they're realizing that, wait a minute, I'm going through these phases, and the manager knew 4 days ago, 3 days ago, that I was going to go through these phases. They're 3 days ahead of me, which really puts the manager at a good advantage, because what ultimately we're trying to do is we're trying to save that employee from themselves at that point. We don't want their ego to get involved. We want to save them. I mean, ultimately, we want to. We've invested in them. And so that's a good way to put them in what's called a therapeutic double bind. You let them know what's going to happen before it happens, and then they're caught. Whatever they do, you're already there waiting. And so you can diffuse the situation that way.
So, I mean, how does... That's what happens after a manager's had this. Mm-hmm. What is the best way to have the what kind of conversation does the manager have with this person that really sets them up to succeed, as opposed to failing? Right.
It's interesting when a manager sits down to talk with me and says, "Gosh, I've got a problem with this employee," and they tell me about it. I often 90% of the time say, "Just say that. Why don't you just have an honest conversation with the employee? Say, you know what, we've gone through this process. We've done some training. We've done some coaching. I'll be the first to admit that, maybe I haven't addressed this as quickly or as firmly as I should have. And acknowledge your part in it, because that levels the playing field. And that in all my theories and when you read in the book, you'll notice that it's about not only coaching the employee, but the manager being coached. In this situation, it was the manager's fault that they didn't address the situation early enough. And we know just in basic problem solving, the earlier you can catch a problem, the smaller it is and the easier it is to work with. And so that's where a person really has to overcome their own fear and face that dragon just a little bit early. And it doesn't have to be, I'm going to go from nice to mean. If you wait too long, you go from nice to mean. You get angry. Instead of, let's just have a conversation.
Right.
And
well, if as a manager, if it seems to me that if part of what I'm going to say is like, look, we're in this situation right now because I, as a manager, look, I kind of screwed up. Mm-hmm. That almost says that you would have to restart the conversation, because it would seem to be funny to me to say, okay, I realize the reason that part of the reason we're here is because as a manager I screwed up, but you're fired.
Right.
Right? It's almost like, yeah, I screwed up, so let me start again, and let's lay things out more clearly what I expect of you.
Right.
And if that doesn't happen, then you're fired. Right?
Yeah, yeah. Because, again, we are dealing with, ultimately we want to deal with this earlier. But if it does come to that, you want to restart the conversation as best you can given the circumstances. And it's perfectly reasonable to say, I've got a part to play in this as well. I know there might be HR directors out there, screaming at me right now.
Right.
But,
Don't say it.
but I
it's
believe
true.
I believe in honesty, and I think that if you're being true and you're being honest with that employee and you're being honest with yourself, that's the best medicine, and you're going to have the best chance of getting across to that employee when you're being true and honest with them. They're going to know that you're not pulling their leg, you're not trying to pull a fast one, because that's what upsets employees the most is when they know what's right or wrong, or they know what's going on in the company, and management is lying to them.
Right.
And they know it. And then they're like, well, you've lied to me here, and I can't even trust you. And it's like, finally, we're having an honest conversation. Great. And let's continue this.
And if you don't do that, if you do it the other way, that's when you run into some trouble. And that's when you maybe run into some trouble legally as well, if you don't do it the right way. And all of a sudden you just like you say, get angry, and you turn and you say something maybe you shouldn't have said in that conversation. And now all of a sudden maybe you do have a legal problem.
Right.
So if you do have to terminate, if it is necessary, you have to do that. This way also protects you a little bit more as well, because you can show that you did this in the right way.
Right, and obviously documentation, but that's a whole other topic. But the main point that I want to get across is oftentimes when employees are terminated, yes, their actions got them terminated, but it was 3 or 10 steps ahead of that, where maybe they weren't trained properly, they weren't coached thoroughly enough. We didn't have enough conversation. I worked with a manager here 6 months ago who was a really good manager, but I had to tell him, look, you need to talk more frequently to your employees, and you need to turn up the heat sooner. Because he was so nice that it would get to that point where he had talked with them, but he really didn't give it the intensity that it was needed. And he didn't need to go from 0 to 100. He just needed to go from 0 to 50. And then the next conversation, 60 or 80, and then we keep ratcheting it up. And I tell people, you've got a dial, use that dial. You don't have to go from, it's like a gas pedal. You don't go from 0 to 100, use it sparingly. But, when it comes time to having an honest conversation with an employee, you need to give it the depth that it requires, to really get the point across.
And that person deserves to.
Yeah.
Well, Kelly Graves, thanks for joining us again. It's always a quick 10 minutes with you on these segments.
It flies.
It goes like that. But thanks for being here. And Kelly writes for us regularly, so we'll bring Kelly back in the show maybe next month or soon after that. All right, thanks, Kelly. All right, well, that's our show for this week. But before we go, we want to thank our sponsor, of course. The Vanta XRF Analyzer from Olympus provides fast, accurate elemental analysis when screening for lead, arsenic, mercury, and other toxic metals in consumer products like toys, apparel, and electronics to help support compliance with RoHS requirements. Other Olympus technologies include ultrasonic flaw detectors and thickness gauges, videoscopes, borescopes, industrial microscopes, advanced non-destructive testing systems, and a large selection of industrial scanners, probes, software programs, and instrument accessories. A lot of stuff there.
A lot of stuff.
Great stuff, yeah. So for more information, visit olympus-ims.com or click on the banner ad, as always, just below or just to the right of this video player screen.
That's right, and that is the end of today's show. And thanks again, Kelly, for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
That's always great.
Appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
And also thanks go out to Martin Volk of TÜV Süd for joining us via Skype. And don't forget that Quality Digest and TÜV Süd are presenting a webinar called Developing a Cybersecurity Strategy. The webinar happens next week on Tuesday, October 3rd at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, and Martin Volk will be your presenter. I'll be host, so keep a lookout for the forthcoming email and your chance to register. And there is also a link underneath the player page.
And there's also one other thing. If you haven't heard about it yet, next week we're not having the show. We are preempting Quality Digest Live. We don't do that very often, but we're preempting Quality Digest Live because we have something, believe it or not, we have something better for you guys than your regular Quality Digest Live. We're going to bring you our inaugural Virtual Test and Measurement Expo right here at this time, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. And we're going to go for 2 hours. We're going to look at some really great technologies from the LS Starrett Company and Farrow Technologies. We're going to have some live drop-ins on Manufacturing Day events. Manufacturing is next Friday, so we'll be looking at some Manufacturing Day events. We'll be talking to some manufacturing experts about the state of U.S. manufacturing. It's all manufacturing, man. It's going to be a great show. So make sure you register for the show. And I think the link is on the player page down below.
The link is on the player page down below.
It will be soon. So check that out and register for it next Friday, October 6th.
There you go. And that is it for today's webinar. And we will see, today's show, QDO.
That's right.
There we go. That's what we're doing right now. All right. And we will see you, we will see you next week at the Expo.
That's right.
Make sure you sign up for that.
That's right. We'll see you then.
Okay, so long.
Bye.